Welcome to EWTN's continuing coverage of the Synod on Youth from Rome. Good evening and welcome. I'm Brian Patrick along with Dr. Matthew Bunson. Matthew is senior contributor to EWTN, a senior editor for the National Catholic Register, and today is the 40th anniversary of the election of St. John Paul II.
October 16th, 1978, the culmination of the so-called Year of Three Popes. We lost Pope Paul VI, now Saint Pope Paul VI. We had the brief pontificate of John Paul I, and we had gloom in the pontificate of Paul VI, then shock at how the pontificate of John Paul I ended. And so everyone was very concerned about where things were going, and out of that gloom came this colossus of Pope Saint John Paul II. 40 years ago tonight, he stood on that loggia of St. Peter's Basilica.
We'll talk more about him and show you some more of his pontificate a little later on tonight. But let's talk about where we are in this synod process now.
Well, we have sort of officially begun the third week. So we've talked about see, judge, and act, the three pillars of how this synod has been constructed. And this week we're now looking at act. And so they had a report today from some of the key figures, including Lorenzo Baldessari, and we know that Pope Francis was there. But now they've moved on to what's called the general congregations. And then we're moving also into what are called the interventions. So the bishops in the synod who are taking part will all be speaking one by one to be heard and to have their voices heard on the key issues that they've been focused on for the last 2.5 weeks now. The other aspect too that we need to mention is that we're sort of catching up with what just ended, which was the second week. And I know that there's a lot of ground to cover there.
Well, they had small group meetings. There are about 14 of these groups, and they each put out a relatio or a summary of what they talked about. And so now, you talked about these interventions. They are actually speeches to the entire group, right?
Yes, the reports are sort of issued to the group as a whole. It's known as the circoli minori. So the little groups, small groups. Of the different language groups. So you had, for example, English, German, French, Portuguese, Spanish, French. All of the main languages in some ways of the church, certainly in the leadership of the church, are represented here. Italian being the most dominant, as you can imagine. The reports themselves are a reflection of the discussions. And when you talk to auditors who've been there and those bishops who've actually been giving us a few glimpses into the discussions, we know that they can be intense at times. There are a lot of strong opinions, and the fruit of that has been published. And you're looking at a variety of perspectives that are present in these discussions. Today, of course, we were at the press conference for the Holy See and the Synod, and one of the people that we heard at length was Paolo Ruffini.
And who is he?
He is the prefect for the so-called Dicastery of Communications. In other words, he is now the communications chief for the Vatican. And we were both there, and it was a pretty lengthy...
He spoke very long and very fast because he tried to cover everything that's in these reports in an audible report, which was very interesting. The one thing that he missed, though, is in the English report, one of the bishops was quoted as saying, "I never realized a synod could be so much fun." So it's not all heavy.
It's not all heavy, and it's not all debate and argument.
Yeah.
Or maybe they're having fun with the debate and the argument. He covered a whole host of things from migration to the relevance, the importance of music to evangelization among young people.
I thought that was interesting.
But I also had a chance to interview him, to speak with him briefly at the end of the press conference, and I asked Paolo Ruffini about finding the right language to reach young people today.
Fathers, we have to use the digital language, but we have to meet one another. We have to meet one another looking in one another's eyes.
In finding that language, you mentioned that in one of the language groups, there was a stress on not watering down the faith, but presenting it in a way that they can understand, young people. How important is that for all of the Synod Fathers here?
I think it's very, very important. It's very important to understand that faith is exigent, but that we have to know that we are peccatori che sono stati perdonati, and we have to look at what gospel says and to be engaged improve ourselves, not to annacquare the faith, but to make the faith significant in meeting each other where youth people are, where everyone is, and to know that we are all sons of God.
Italian is obviously Paolo's first language. He actually slipped back into it. What was he saying?
Yes, he did. Well, there were two spots where he slipped into the Italian.
Yeah.
Completely understandable. I will say that I speak a little Italian. His English is much better than my Italian, so we'll give him that.
What was he referring to?
What he was referring to was he was talking about that we are all sinners, but we're also saved sinners. In other words, we have been given our salvation by Christ. And that one of those things that a number of people have been concerned about, how the Synod is going to approach some of these issues of sin and redemption. Well, here's the head of the dicastery telling us, no, this is up front. He also used the Italian word essentially for watered down. So I was asking him about the risks of watering down the faith, and he said, no, we're not watering it down.
Well, at the press conference also this afternoon, you mentioned this language issue. That was actually brought up by the Chaldean Cardinal Sacco of Iraq.
Yeah, Raphael Sacco, who's the patriarch of the Babylonians, of the Chaldeans in Iraq. Now, this is, by way of context, the leader of the largest group of Iraqi Christians. And this is a country, of course, that has been ravaged by war and suffering. But he made an important observation. He said this is his fourth synod, and he said that this one in particular is different. He said he called it a school. And then he added that this is a place where we're trying to find a language. We're seeking a language to talk to young people. So how we're communicating the truths of the faith is becoming increasingly a theme as this synod has progressed.
Another comment that was made that really intrigued me, because I've talked to some young people, and even I've experienced this. I was a young person at one time, where you feel like everyone else has the playbook for life. They have the user's manual, and I didn't get it. And he's saying we all need a manual, a how-to for life.
Yeah, and that's Cardinal Peter Turkson, who's a very well-known figure, certainly in the Vatican here. He's been a long-time Vatican leader and somebody who was actually considered papabile. In other words, who might be elected Pope back in 2013. He made the observation that we need to have a manual for life, and he said the Synod needs to compose that manual. And he said that we need to invite young people to absorb the wisdom of the Church to enable them to succeed. But that vision, sort of the idea of a manual, is one that I think may resonate beyond even just the press conference today.
Yeah, and this is an opportunity to provide at least the basics for this manual for life. I like to call it a game plan, if you want to put it in sports technology. There was also an issue that was brought up by the Monsignor from Brazil.
Yes, his name is Archbishop Jaime Spengler. He's a Franciscan from Brazil. Now, very impressive Italian in the press conference, telling me that he probably studied here at one point. Or
Portuguese is his first language.
Portuguese is his first language. Also, similar to Cardinal Bergoglio before his election, he was fluent in Italian. So we're getting a sense, too, of the close Roman ties of a lot of these bishops. They studied here in many cases. But he was talking about a lot of the social ills that Brazil is facing. And the reality is that while it is arguably the largest Catholic country in the world, there is a severe set of social problems. And the one that he focused on today was drug addiction. And he was saying that the irony of having a culture that encourages drug use and all forms of addiction, but then doesn't do anything to help deal with that addiction. And he sees this as one of the key tasks for the Church.
We apologize for the car alarm that you're hearing in the background here on this evening in Rome. It's a beautiful evening, by the way. In fact, Monsignor Spengler, he actually used the word crucified. He says that this drug addiction is just devastating the young generation. They're being crucified. He says the drug dealers are essentially killers, especially in the suburbs of the main cities of Brazil.
Yeah, those are also called the favelas. These are the poorest sections of Brazil. They're also some of the most violent places in all of Latin America. So he's speaking not just then of the ills being created by drug addiction, but also the violence being perpetrated by the drug dealers. This is another one of those fundamental realities that the Church faces in Latin America, and we've been talking already about the Synod bringing together these viewpoints, perspectives, and experiences of bishops and young people from all over the world. This is a classic example of that now we're hearing how Latin America is suffering. We already have heard from Pope Francis about the drug cartels and the violence across Colombia and Mexico, and now we're also hearing the perspective of Brazil, where the same problems are there.
And this is not unique to Central America or Latin America. It is a problem for the United States. The opioid epidemic is killing mostly young people. I can't tell you how many families I know who have a young person who died of an overdose suddenly, 30, 31 years old, 25 years old, parents of young children. So Monsignor Spengler called this a harsh reality that few find a path to recovery, and he calls on the church to be a beacon of hope and to be a force in creating recovery paths.
And a synod like this may surprise some of the bishops who come here who have the problems of opioid addiction in their diocese or archdiocese, other forms of severe addiction, the plague of the cartels, and finding solutions and are offering solutions that they can take back with them. Having listened to the perspectives and listened to some of the solutions that have been tried by other bishops, maybe they've been tried and they have failed. In other cases, they tried and were more successful. It was pastoral solutions, but the church has to be in the foreground. It has to be in the lead on dealing with this crisis, because so many youth are being lost to these addictions and to the violence that surrounds them.
Well, as we mentioned yesterday, Pope Francis is a regular daily participant in the Synod. He comes early, he mixes with the people, the young people, the media, the other bishops, priests, and other religious here. And I understand that he was using a hanky today.
Yes, it's our understanding from sources that it's pretty clear from the video as he walked in today to the Synod Hall, the aula of Pope Paul VI, that he's not feeling well. That apparently he has caught some kind of a cold, and that was pretty clear in the video today.
Yeah, he's got his hanky there wiping his nose, but he's ready for work though.
Well, we have been able to track him every day so far in the Synod, and he has been more than engaged in what's happening in the Synod Hall. So today, even though he's clearly under the weather, it hasn't stopped him from participating very fully, and it's my understanding that he has continued to speak very freely and also then to mingle with the Synod participants, the bishops, but also the young people who are in attendance.
There are about 36 of these so-called youth auditors, and when we come back on EWTN, we're going to meet a few of them. So stay with us for more of our continuing coverage of the 2018 Synod on Youth.
To lead and trust us with something. We have a strong faith in the church, we have a strong faith in God, and we cannot compromise for anything. I mean, that's how we grew up in Nigeria. So when it has to do with faith.
Canada, where people have been hurt by the church, or people feel that the church is distant, people feel that the church can be hypocritical and not practice the gospel. And I think that's really what I would want to change most. That when people meet Christians, Catholics, when people meet priests, when people come to parishes, they encounter a community that manifests the love of God.
Julian Paparella of Canada, and just one of the youth auditors here at the Synod on Youth. I'm Brian Patrick, Dr. Matthew Bunson.
And we're joined by another one of those youth attending the Synod here, Daniel Bashir. Welcome.
Yes,
welcome to the program.
Thank you so much.
From Pakistan.
Yes, I'm from Pakistan.
Well, you are a youth auditor from Pakistan. You're National Youth Coordinator of Jesus Youth, which is a lay movement in Pakistan. Talk a little bit about the movement.
Okay, if I talk about the movement, it's like a Jesus Youth movement. Jesus Youth is a movement, it's an international movement. Now it's present in more than 35 countries. It's approved by the Holy See in 2016. we got the approval from the Holy See. So like now we are present more than 35 countries.
And when did you first become aware of the synod that was going to be held, and how did you end up coming from Pakistan to Rome to take part in it?
About this synods, okay, it's like a first of all I say thanks to the Lord, because I don't know about these things, because as a youth missionary, as a coordinator of Jesuit Pakistan, youth coordinator Jesuit Pakistan, I took 6-month commitment from my city to another city, because I living in Karachi, so I took 6-month commitment from Karachi to Diocese of Multan. So it's like I live 6 months there. During my 6 months of the missionary work, it's like a bishop's conference choose me for the pre-synodal meetings. So it's like I was aware about the synods, because I was a participant of this youth synod meeting also. So from the synods meeting, they have chooses me. They have Pope Francis appointed me as a auditor of the synod.
As you gather with young people from around the world,
Yeah.
how are the issues for young people in Pakistan different from, especially the West? Because we think that the issues that we have are it sometimes, but really you're in a situation that can be extremely difficult as a Christian.
Okay, it's like as you talk about the challenges, the problems of the youth in the Pakistan is a difference. It's like because of the Western country, because of the different country. Yes, true. But the reason is that, okay, I'm very hopeful with the church, because I say we have a difficulty sometime in the Pakistan, but I say our presence is the presence of Christ. They know us, they experience us because of our presence. If we left our country, if we left everything about Pakistan, if we say something, it's like a bad about Pakistan, no. You know, in Pakistan, in many cities, we have a freedoms of religions. We can say, we can go for the mass easily. We can say everything. So like for me, it's like a great blessing for me. Lord sent me in Pakistan. It's like I'm proud to be a Pakistani Christian. Yeah.
And you mentioned that you go to Mass, and your own development as a Catholic. What has that been like?
Okay. If like I share my testimony, it's like before 2011, I was very, 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 very far from the Lord. It's like in 2011, in October 2011, one thing happened in my life, in my family. It's completely changed my life. It's like so we were some of the troubles in my family. There is a big problem in my family, so I've decided to kill myself. I am a loser person. I cannot cut my hands. I cannot hang myself. I've decided to do one thing. It's like from my house, it's near to the railway crossing is there. So I've decided, I just starting walking from my house to the railway station. And the first time I experienced God, He spoke to me. And He said, Daniel, now living for other. So that onwards, it's like now I'm a Jesuit missionary. I'm proud to be it. So like I took 6-month commitment in different part of the Pakistan. I went to the UAE, United Arab Emirates, as a missionary, as a Jesuit missionary.
What's the message that you brought here to the Synod, and also what is the message that you're receiving from it? I understand you're going to actually give a presentation.
Okay, like if I take, yes, I'm going to present myself. It's like very soon I'm giving my presentation to the Holy Father. It's like and I just say one thing only to the Synod's Father only. Young people are thirsty. They are thirsty of love of God. They wait for the experience of the community which have same charism of evangelizations, because people are know about the evangelization things. They want to share Jesus to others also. If we're talking about the youth, we are talking about their dancer, their musicians, they are no. We are youth, we are missionaries also. And we have to, it's like we have to promote this phase of the youth also.
Now you've studied medicine, is that right?
Yeah, yes.
But I understand that you have also discerned something else, a vocation to the priesthood.
Vocation for my priesthood. Yeah. It's happened in my life, because it's like in 2012, I went for Thailand for Jesuit International 1-month training. After this training, during this training, I encountered Christ to the Blessed Sacrament, and I received many texts from the Lord. It's like He talked to me. It's like, Daniel, I want you. So like I've decided, because it's like in 2012 to 2013, I took 1 year commitment to another part of the world. So I went in UAE, United Arab Emirates. During my full-time shifts, during my missionary year, I experienced many the priest, because it's like in the Pakistan we don't have too much priest, but we know one thing: no priest, no Eucharist. You have to love the priest, because we need the Eucharist. So no priest, no Eucharist.
And in your own life, you have experienced very profoundly the loving mercy of God. And here you are at a synod with the Pope, who has made mercy one of the pillars of his pontificate. And you've met him now, I'd imagine, a few times here in the Synod Hall.
Yeah. Okay. If I talk about the merciful act, it's like this thing also. It's like which thing I brought from my country here, and which things I take from here to my country is, we have a hope. Do not lose your hope, because we have a hope in Christ, and Christ is with us always. This is a hope for myself also, for my countries also, for the youth of the Pakistan also. We have a bright future in the Catholic Church, because now the youth are awake. We're full of passion and zeal. Thank you.
You have a great joy, and it shines all over your face. We've talked to young people about what they want the church to hear from them. What is it that you think that the church should ask of you and the other young people?
Okay. It's like the young people in the world, they are asking about the church to talk about our challenges. What challenges we are facing as a youth? What are the challenges we are facing, and how we overcome of this type of challenges? Church have to speak about these things also. That's why we are here. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, we appreciate you being with us this evening. And what's ahead for you tomorrow?
It's like tomorrow. It's like hopefully, if I get a chance in the evening time, because the Holy Father have an audience with the people, so he will not come in the morning. So like tomorrow evening, I think hopefully I get a chance to speak about my interventions for. It's like 4 minutes only, but I have wrote many things about things.
I'm sure you'll give a great speech.
Well, and Dan, you'll know that Brian and I and all of our viewers are praying that your vocation is fulfilled in ordination someday, and
yes.
Someday you may be saying Mass for us.
Yes, Amen.
Yeah, thanks for saying yes to the call. I wonder, part of this synod is on discernment. It sounded like your calling was very sudden, and you responded immediately. Was there any period in there where you wondered and questioned and had time for real discernment?
For my yes to Lord, for my priesthood studies, it took 6 years. It's not suddenly happened. It's like just like a Mary. She said yes to God. She forget all these things. How it happened? I'm the woman. I'm the young lady. How it happened? No, I know one thing also. When we say yes to the Lord, God take in my life. He has a space in my life, so He will take care of all the things which is necessary for me also.
Daniel Bashir of Pakistan.
Yes.
We appreciate you being with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. God bless you. God bless you.
God bless you.
Please pray for me also. Pray for my vocation. Thank you.
All right. Next up on EWTN News coverage of the Synod on Youth, we are going to have a bishop from the Netherlands talking about the secular nature of that country, the challenges that the church faces there, but also the deep pockets of Catholicism. So stay with us for more on EWTN Presents the Synod on Youth. EWTN News presents the Synod on Youth from Rome. Good evening. Thank you for joining us on EWTN. I'm Brian Patrick, along with Dr. Matthew Bunson, the senior editor for EWTN's National Catholic Register. We are joined by a special guest this evening, Bishop Everard Johannes de Jong of the Netherlands. We appreciate you being with us, Your Excellency.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Given the secular nature of your country, I wonder how you prepared for this Synod on Youth.
By just meeting young people. I'm the bishop responsible for the young people in my diocese. I used to be the youth minister, a youth bishop in the Netherlands. And so yeah, you read about the young, you meet them. I used to be student chaplain at the University of Maastricht in our diocese. That was the best time of my life, I can say.
That's great.
So, yeah. So just meeting people, and yeah, I didn't have much time because there was a bishop who couldn't come, who was in fact the youth bishop of the Netherlands now, and so I had to prepare myself in a week. I didn't read all the documents and
Crash course.
Crash course.
Yes.
Yeah, what they prepared, and I'm impressed by what they prepared. Yeah.
Well, Your Excellency, young people are being heard from by the bishops. Listening is one of the key components. I know that Pope Francis has talked about that's in the Instrumentum Laboris.
Right.
How have you gone about, certainly in this synod, listening to youth, not just from the Netherlands, but from all over the world?
Yeah. First of all, you notice that every young person is different. And it's not only the continents that are different and the European countries that are different from one another. It's really different when you talk to someone from Eastern Europe or from Western Europe. The backgrounds, whether they are ill or not, what skin color they have, what kind of faith they have. It's so diverse that yeah, that's really the concept of John Paul II of the person is first of all very important, that you listen to this person sitting now next to me or opposite of me. And then you can try to find something in common with other young people, and that's of course that they live in a digital world, that it's over-eroticized. It's kind of bringing a lot of stress to them because they have to succeed in all kinds of ways. The faith is kind of evaporating, at least here in the West. Other people, if you hear about Korea or Africa, Nigeria or Poland or whatever, it's still quite strong. But now I forgot the question.
I think you answered.
Actually, I think you did a very nice job of answering.
The digital world, though, is a challenge, but also an opportunity. I mean, it connects the world like it's never been connected before, and certainly it connects the church, the universal church. So how can we really capitalize on that, especially in reaching the youth, speaking to them in their language through their modes of communication?
Yeah, it's not so easy. I know parents that don't understand the messages the kids send to their friends. As a message, so it's a lone language, so it's not so easy to get into that. On the other hand, the question of love is everywhere present, and there's a lot of loneliness even in the digital world, or maybe because of the digital world. What I see is a paradox. You can reach everyone on the whole world within a second, and at the same time, it's not very deep. I don't know whether you have heard of Marshall McLuhan. He used to be the media guru, but he said there are warm and cold media. And I think the virtual world is a cold medium. You can really reach people, you can really touch people. And even though you might have 100 friends or 1,000 friends or 5,000 Facebook friends, they're behind the screen. They're not here, they're not touchable in a certain way. So there's this screen, the glass between us and them. And that leaves them in a certain way empty in their hearts. And so I think we need to go to them, and that's what the Pope always said too. We have to smell the sheep, to meet them eye to eye, face to face, to really discern what they need.
So we can connect through the digital world, but that's not enough.
It's the first step.
Yeah.
It's the first step.
One of the observations that's been made about the impact of the digital continent, to use Pope Benedict XVI's term for the digital world, is an anthropological transformation that's happening as a result of this. That's also impacting the dignity of the human person, to go back to also John Paul II.
Yeah, it's the danger, I would say, seduction. Some people even say that though the electronic gear itself changes the wiring of the brain, and it might change our perception of the world. And you see it in young people happen, that there's hardly any difference between the real world and the virtual world, or augmented reality. And then you see, what is reality? Is that in my thought? It reminds me as a philosopher of the idealists, Immanuel Kant and even Descartes already, but especially Fichte, that project their own world into the world and don't see anything else anymore than their world. And that's exactly what the huge media do now. They give us back what we want to see, and so we will increasingly live in our own world that is narcissistic, and it's kind of lonely too.
So reaching then young people in that environment, in that sort of a bubble
Right,
of the
exactly.
digital world,
Yeah, that's a good word for that.
requires also finding the right language to speak to them in a rapidly transforming linguistic environment too.
Yeah, you have to get into the bubble. Yeah.
How can we?
I think what is many times said during the Synod is that the youth itself should be the protagonists of reaching the youth. They know the language. They know how to get into these bubbles. They're connected to these bubbles. We as old people, sorry.
No, we're right there with
you. We're not really fit to get it. So in this fast world of gaming and so on, and it goes so fast that they are not interested in our very slow language, very slow ideas. This just. But I wouldn't say that the dignity of the human person has been deteriorating in a certain way. It depends still, I think, in a certain way about how we deal with techniques. I studied electronics myself, so maybe I'm predisposed to see things more positively, but still I think it can help to reach people that aren't to be reached. On the other hand, we have to be careful that we should not reduce the person as such to this electronic version of him or her.
So the church is asking, or the young people are asking a lot of the church in the Synod. I wonder if you might reflect on what the church would ask of them, and are we asking too little? Are we making it too easy instead of really
many bishops notice that it's very good to listen to young people to bridge our world, our vision of the faith, our encounter with Christ to them. You first have to speak their language, feel what they feel, think what they think. But then there is a moment that we have the kerygma, that we have the pronouncement of faith, and we have to tell them something that we have been given. Like St. Paul says, I stand in a tradition already that has been given to me, and I will transmit that tradition to others. And the living Christ, we should pronounce him, and the young people should announce the living Christ to one another with joy and with power. So there is this both listening and talking, not talking too fast and without listening, because then it just drops off. But if we aren't saying anything to young people that are asking questions and are not giving any answers to their questions, and then we leave them alone. And many people have said in the Synod, also young people, Christ is the answer to so many answers. Of course, when we want to calculate, we need a mathematician, but the existential questions with meaning for life, what is the meaning of my life? That's God. That's his love. Yeah. And without his love, we won't be able to really live to the full. So we should, not only with words, of course, but especially with deeds, show them we love them and God loves them.
And in Sunday's gospel, the rich young man asked a difficult question, and Jesus did not lower the standards.
Right.
He put it to him straight.
Yeah, and I think that's what young people ask us to do. I still remember John Paul II many times at World Youth Days. He really put the standard there. Mm-hmm. We want to be holy people there. Young people, you have to be striving for holiness. And that's what Jesus asks us to do. And we have to give a good example. But still, I think we attract them exactly by having these high standards. I say, I don't want you to be mediocre. I still remember a girl, I was studying at Catholic University in Washington in the 80s, and then a classmate of mine was a girl from, I think, Puerto Rico. Once in the metro station, Brooklyn Station, I still remember, she said to me, don't be a mediocre priest. Oh, wow, yeah, that's what I need. Not just an ordinary one, I need a real one. And don't be a real ordinary parent, be a real parent to your kids, and be a real wife to your man, to your husband, and reciprocal. So I think that the gospel is, on the other hand, we know that grace is necessary. Of course, we can do it ourselves, but it doesn't work. Teresa of Lisieux always says, no, it's the grace. We can step into the lift or the elevator. I don't know what the English or American word is, but he will raise us up. He will give us the power, the grace to be really holy. We can't do it ourselves.
A synod like this brings together bishops from all over the world, young people from all over the world, with those perspectives. You just said that you studied in Washington, D.C. at Catholic University of America. I think you did your doctorate there, is that right?
Yeah.
Galileo, wasn't it?
Yeah, very well.
And the reason I ask that is because here we have all these bishops from different corners of the world speaking to each other. In your sort of the quiet conversations, or sometimes not necessarily quiet
Right.
conversations,
Yeah.
in between sessions at dinners, talk a little bit about the bishops you've been meeting from around the world and some of the young people, and the perspectives that they're bringing about evangelization.
Yeah, the core is always Jesus. I tell them sometimes that I talk to the Protestant leader of the biggest Protestant church in Holland, and I asked him why is it that the young people in your church have a bigger faith, have many more meetings, many more groups, we have bigger events in the country. And he said, let me think about it 2 weeks. And then he came back and he said, there are two things. First of all, we have a personal relationship with Jesus. And secondly, we know the Bible. And I think that's exactly what we miss. And if I would say evangelization means personal relationship with Jesus. There was a young guy, he said in Poland even, it was a bishop, sorry, it was a bishop who said in Poland, they had many retreats. And then the first question was, what would you ask of Jesus? And 2,000 kids in the huge retreats of about 10,000 people would say, I don't have anything to ask. He said that already there in Poland, people lost the personal sense of God. God is something or impersonal. You don't ask God something. You don't have a relationship with Him. That's the beginning of the end. And so I think evangelizing means showing my personal relationship with Jesus in my prayer, in my asking Him, thanking Him, glorifying Him. So that's the first thing. And then reading Him and the experience people had with Him in the Bible and share with them. My youth group, where I started as a chaplain, we read just the Gospel of the Sunday and putting ourselves into the Gospel, seeing how Jesus would react to any people. That's life. I mean, we can't evangelize without Jesus.
Well, I grew up in the 60s, so I had pre-Vatican II and post-Vatican II. We didn't read the Bible as such, but we all knew the Bible because of the epistles, the Gospels. So, but my big question is why as Catholics who can receive Jesus directly in the Eucharist, why don't we have this close, how close can you get to Jesus?
No, I was in Nashville not too long ago, and half of the sisters there, the booming monastery, told me they were together as novices. They found their vocation in front of the Blessed Sacrament, in the personal relationship with Jesus. But who tells them that? Who tells them that Jesus is there? And that's the problem. Do we really believe that Jesus is there in the Blessed Sacrament? And if He's there, I know a man in Lourdes. He was maybe grown up a Catholic. He was there by accident, and someone took him in the Eucharistic tent there of adoration, and he didn't know what the Eucharist was, but he saw it, and he said, "Wow, God was there." And now I want to be a man of God. He felt the presence of Jesus there in the Blessed Sacrament. Yeah, that's what we should irradiate. So if we enter a church, if we don't kneel, people won't see that we believe that He's there. And when we talk, and when we just go ahead, and we should, the presence of the sacred person, it should be in our body language that He's there.
Well, your wife discovered that on her very first visit to Mass.
Yes, that's absolutely true.
Tell me that story.
In Washington, D.C., a very similar experience.
Really?
You have referenced Pope St. John Paul II a couple of times just in this brief conversation that we've had. Here we are exactly 40 years ago that he was elected Pope.
Right, exactly,
And he said to the world at his installation Mass, and it's one of the great themes of his pontificate, be not afraid.
Right.
And here we also are in the pontificate of Pope Francis, and one of his great mottos is parousia, of having that courage of the original Christians. How important is it for us as a church to instill in young people that courage that John Paul II spoke about, to be not afraid, but also to have that sort of apostolic courage?
Yeah. I think being afraid means that you are afraid to be hurt. But love casts out all fear. So I think it's somehow open. You cannot be loved when you don't let yourself be hurt. That's a kind of paradox in a certain way. If you're not vulnerable, you cannot be really hurt. But people have lost a lot of love. Parents have divorced, schoolmates have left you, you have had many relationships, and there is no love, and you close yourself off for the love, even for the love of God, and then you harden your heart somehow. So We need communities of love and of faith that stand around you, not grasping you, but leaving you there as you are and respect you very much, and giving you the chance to really open yourself like a flower that has been, or any animal that wants to stick to itself, and that way is very lonely. But you need warmth of love, and then you can open yourself, and then they will notice that you don't have to be afraid of love. I think people are really afraid to be loved. And when you are not afraid to be loved, then you will get courage to go out.
That's beautiful inspiration. Matthew, you mentioned the emphasis on courage. We wouldn't need courage if we didn't have fear. I mean, that's how we get through fear.
Right, that's true. Yeah.
And with faith, though, isn't it really, to me, that's the only way I know how to face my fear, is it with my faith in the Lord.
Yeah, it's a gift too.
Yes.
You have to overcome yourself in a certain way, but you can't overcome yourself. You can't grasp you out of the mud or the sump, or how do you call it, with your own hair. You need grace, Christ who graces you up, and then He gives you courage. If you ask Him, you can just ask Him. If there's anyone who is fearful in television, I would say, ask Jesus to give you courage. You can ask Him. It's a gift. It's the Holy Spirit.
Well, here we've covered love, we've covered faith. Hope. Hope is something that oftentimes is in considerably short supply with young people. Millennials, I know, live sometimes in a situation of despair in the midst of great wealth and material happiness, supposedly, of great abundance in the West, but also of persecution and economic problems around the world. Hope is something that the church needs to provide to offer them, doesn't it?
Yeah, because we have someone who was crucified and who was risen. So no matter what happens to you, there's always hope, because even death is not the end. And so we are, maybe someone remarked during the conference that we didn't talk about the cross. Not as the cross as the end, but the cross as the new beginning, as a sign of hope. We put the crosses. Now in Europe we put all kind of Buddha images everywhere, but He's not the risen Lord. So we should not be afraid of the cross, and then knowing that He died on the cross but was resurrected. That's our sign of hope. And young people might know that too. I still remember that my niece, a sister, doesn't believe, and then her child first went to my parents, and they have a cross, of course, at home. And she looked at the cross and said, "Oh, Mom, this man must have been suffering a lot." So we don't even see the cross anymore as a man who suffered, but through the suffering and death came to resurrection. And so there is no situation, no guilt, no terrible destruction that cannot be rebuilt by the love of Christ and the life of Christ.
One of the English language groups in the Circuli Minori that reported that we were covering today quoted Augustine. I think it was the group with Bishop Barron.
Right.
And they quoted, referred to Augustine's famous quote that our hearts are restless until they rest in you.
It's a wonderful quote, yeah.
Do you find in Europe especially that restlessness is there?
Sure.
But people don't necessarily know how to get.
Oh, sure. You know, I think one of the things the Pope really stresses a lot is discernment. And I think even in schools in the Netherlands, they are now discovering that once you have a certain superficial, ephemeral experience, it leaves you alone, leaves you desolate. Whereas deeper experiences, that might cost you a lot, but remain with inner peace and remain in a joy even. So what we have to learn, the young people, that there are various kinds of joy, that there are superficial joys and there are deeper joys. But first maybe they have to have the disappointment of the superficial joys, that they don't last, and that they will look for further joys, like St. Augustine did. But we have to help them, discerning them.
Bishop de Jong, what a beautiful visit we've had with you, and don't be surprised if Matthew has actually read that dissertation on Galileo and will use some material for one of his new books. He has a way of doing that.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me, and it was a great joy to talk to you.
You have blessed us by your presence.
Thank you.
When we come back, we are going to revisit this 40th anniversary of the election of St. John Paul II. Stay with us here on EWTN. The official theme is the Synod on Young People, the Faith, and Vocational Discernment. For short, we're calling it the Synod on Youth, as EWTN News presents. We're grateful to have you with us. And Matthew Bunson, I'm Brian Patrick with Matthew. And on the 16th of October, 40 years ago today, right there on that loggia, John Paul II came out.
Even I'm young enough or old enough, however you want to describe it, to remember the night that the announcement was made. And the announcers weren't exactly sure who he was. They came out and said Carolum and then
Votiva. Yeah, it was a tough one. Yes.
And Votiva, and I remember somebody actually thought, well, is this an African? Because they weren't sure exactly who this was, but it didn't take them very long to discover that Carol Votiva was unlike anything we'd had in the history of the papacy.
I suppose it tied in with that because the Holy Father actually met with the president of Poland today, who of course is a Catholic, and it was yesterday, I believe, that the president of Poland was here. And I was curious to see if there would be any Polish delegations at the canonization of Paul VI on Sunday. There were huge delegations in 2014 when John Paul II was canonized.
Well, it was Paul VI who elevated, rather consistently moved up young Karol Wojtyła. He distinguished himself rather profoundly at the Second Vatican Council with his participation, with his wisdom, and of course it was Paul VI who made him a cardinal at a time when a Polish cardinal was still an impressive thing, but outside of Poland, outside of Europe, not that well known. But over those next years, Karol Wojtyła traveled. He became very well known, not just as a philosopher and a theologian, but as somebody who could reflect very deeply on the situation facing modern man, which is, of course, one of the great themes of the Second Vatican Council.
We talked earlier about fear and overcoming it, and I'll never forget. I was about 23 years old when John Paul, his first message was, "Do not be afraid." He said, "Open the doors to Christ. Open them wide." And I find it interesting that from the English language relatio, the report from the English language group, they talked about fear. And it said, with regards to the fear that some feel when they're facing their call, we would add the passage of Peter walking on water. He's called by Christ to come and walk. And he does. He only begins to sink when he takes his eyes off Jesus, but Jesus rescues him. And I just love that passage because I can almost put myself in Peter's place. First of all, when Jesus said, "Oh, you have little faith," it's like, I got out of the boat, but then he lost sight of Jesus. And when I lose sight of Jesus, I can feel my spirit sinking. But all we have to do is reach out and say, "Lord, help me." And he's right there.
And John Paul II had that trust. You know, we were talking with Bishop de Jong about faith, about hope, about charity. And John Paul II reminded the world of the central place of Christ. His very first encyclical, Redemptor Homines, pondered the question of man, of humanity, but said that man is sort of a mystery to himself unless seen through Christ. And that was a message that he then carried throughout the world. And of course, John Paul II, in that World Youth Day, we're here to Synod on Youth, but in that World Youth Day, I think it was in 1993 in Denver, there was something magical about that moment when John Paul was there. And it was a transformative experience. And I don't know about you, but I have met, I don't know how many men who became priests because of the experiences that they had with John Paul II.
I did not meet that saint personally. However, we saw a little bit earlier of the Holy Father's visit to the United States right after his election. I was in Chicago covering it for Chicago radio station, and he was about from me to the camera when he passed in his limousine, and our eyes locked, and I'll never forget that. And I wasn't a practicing Catholic at the time. I had lapsed, but there was a touch there. There was a call that I will never forget, and just so very blessed by that experience.
And John Paul, for all of this immense achievement, the great legacies that he left in the theology of the body, of his writings, the one thing that I think will be of the greatest value to the young people here in this synod is the Catechism of the Catholic Church. This great stone of solidity, this rock, pun intended, that John Paul II gave to the world. And this is how you start to provide clarity when you're speaking to young people. We talked to someone last night who made the observation about that they can tell when someone's a fake. Well, John Paul II is as real as they come. And that catechism is that foundation for authenticity if you're going to be a Catholic and if you're going to be teaching young people the power of the faith, the transformational power of the faith.
Now, St. John Paul II became our Holy Father 40 years ago, right here in Rome. As our continuing coverage of the Synod on Youth comes to you from EWTN, we leave you with these images of St. John Paul II on this 40th anniversary of his election. Matthew and I will be back with Father Thomas Petrie in the morning, or rather tomorrow evening. We hope that you will join us then.